Well, the last week of class is here. It's been an interesting ride. Not completely pleasant at all times, certainly for me. I have not enjoyed this at all. I really miss talking to you guys and also, bouncing the class off of you. When you're here, I can see your faces. I can see when you're sort of getting things, not getting things. We can react to each other and just talk. Not only in the classroom, but in the halls. Halls in my office. It's a rich experience that we are missing and that I am missing. For some of you, this may be better. Almost every circumstance we have in our life, there are some people that like it better. So for some of you, this may have been a much better semester. And for some of you, not as good. For instance, I was revealing my feelings about it. So there'll be, always a diversity of experience and a diversity of appreciation across what happened. So chapter 11, activity-based management. Just like the other chapters, the first lecture will be a background and introduction to some of the ideas involved in activity-based management. A little bit of the history. This chapter for you is not going to be an extremely technical chapter. It's more of a wrap-up. That's because of this book. So one way you can think about the book that you have right now is sort of an activity-based management book, or a world-class thinking book. Activity-based management and world-class and lean thinking are heavily overlapped in terms of what they're trying to do. So chapter 11 for you will be not a lot of new thinking, but some new techniques to apply your thinking. If you had taken any other book, any other book that's used in North America, this chapter would be novel and unique to you because all of the other books are only in the traditional realm. They talk, be a few paragraphs here and there about world-class or lean production, but books are resolutely in the traditional realm. So for you, this is a little bit of a breather in a certain sense, not a lot of new concepts, a couple of new computations to do, and a couple of new ideas, but ideas that are consistent with the things you've done before. So activity-based management. Remember, we talked about, chapter 10. I had this on the board. This is the smiley face, good. This is bad. This is good. Okay, so just skip the journal entry part of it. Do the analysis, but also make decisions. So this chapter gives us a little practice at how we make decisions based on activities, which we've been doing for the entire time. It also introduces in detail another idea. The book still is using an old-fashioned way to approach this. I leave it there on purpose so that we can talk about it. If you, I hope you read the book before reading this lecture. If not, stop and do it. If you're not doing it that way, you're going to get some of this backwards and you won't have the full learning because you won't have gone through the correct process, but that's up to you. One of the problems in the traditional way to approach ABM is that we have the concept of value added and non-value added. It turns out this is sort of a big mistake. One, using the word value is a problem. They probably should never have done that. Also, the way they outline it and the way they do this is not very sophisticated and it leads to problems. It almost never works. Now, the reason is not because the underlying thinking is bad, because the underlying thinking is good. The reason is that our definitions were weak, and then what we were trying to do was a little bit too dramatic and not really possible. This led to all sorts of collisions inside the company. Most of this stuff fails when it shouldn't fail. The underlying idea is a great idea, but I'll show you how it fails. When they talk about this in your ABM chapter, they do the normal thing. Everyone says first, step 1, find or identify VA and non-NVA, non-value added activities. That's step 2. Step 1. Step 2 is eliminate all non-value-added activities. This is a giant mistake, and it causes internal corporate fights that cannot be solved, okay? And it's because of the primitive nature of the definition. If you use a clear definition of value-added and non-value-added, then certain things like accounting, plumbing, and custodial services are very clearly non-value-added with most of the definitions of value-added, non-value-added. So what happens is everyone goes, oh, whoops, well, that's wrong. We have to have accounting. We have to have custodians. So what they do is they start softening the definition of value-added and non-value-added. This means that pretty soon these concepts become, essentially useless. They become useless. The way this starts is step one, identify or find all the value-added and non-value-added activities. So I tell you what, I'm 64 years old. Let's say I'm in the company, I've been there 30 years. Do you think it's possible that me or any of my staff are ever going to be called non-value-added? No, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. I got the muscle power in there. I got a lot of power, a lot of history. I know a lot of people. My former employees are now also senior employees all over the organization, and they cannot, they're going to support me when I refuse to have anything in my department be called non-value-added. On the other hand, remember this is where I jump to the other side screen. On the other hand, if you have a young manager like you, newly promoted manager, you haven't been with the company that long, I guarantee you, you're not going to have the political muscle power to resist having half of your guys called non-value added. Boom. The whole thing just becomes a nightmare after that. It's just ridiculous. The end result of who or what gets called NVA is almost totally political. It has nothing to do with any kind of reality. So what we need to do then is step back and look at this situation. So the textbook stays with the traditional view so you can see it. And I hope that you actually went through and looked at it and read it, because it probably made total and complete sense to you. Okay, until this lecture, you bought into it. So that's the learning event, is by having you buy into that and going, oh yeah. And then poof, if I can break that, that's a really strong learning event. So now here's how I'm going to break. And I'm going to say that we need to have a good definition of value added and not value added, but a clear one, unambiguous definition of value added, not value added. So value added, everything is value added if the customer can tell it was or was not done. Okay? If the customer can tell that you did something, then it's value added. Notice we're not getting into deep economic logic of whether the customer wanted it or didn't want it or how much you're going to pay. We're just saying we need a clear definition, one that we really can't argue too much with, because we're going to add something else. In addition to the value add, non-value add concept, we're going to add a concept of is something necessary or not. I mean, we know accounting is necessary, right? We know custodial services are necessary. But, the customer can't tell whether we did accounting or not. They can't tell whether we outsourced the whole thing to another country. And if every accountant dies and the software stops working, the company can still roll on for a couple of weeks or even months with no accounting at all done. And the customer would never tell. Now, ultimately, a product would stop arriving, but they wouldn't know why. So they can't detect accounting or custodial services or plumbing or legal, compliance exercises. None of that. So none of that's really going to should ever be called value added from the customer perspective. So we are going to take a strong customer perspective. If the customer can tell that the thing was done or exists, it's value added. If the customer cannot tell, it's non-value added. Okay? So, economically, not the strongest definition. However, it adds a huge amount of clarity and precision, because most of what we looked at, we will be able to tell with clarity whether the customer can observe it or not. Okay? Then we're going to add another dimension. Okay? So the way we're going to rescue this system, because this system here is going to fail. It cannot succeed. The internal politics will kill it 100% of the time. We're going to add the concept, it is something necessary. So we're going to say things are either needed or not needed. Okay? By adding these two, a hardcore, hard customer-based definition of value-added, non-value-added, plus our internal assessment of whether something is needed or not needed, we will create a tool that really is valuable and doesn't paralyze the organization with political infighting. We're going to come up with a 2x2 matrix, which is, every business professor's favorite matrix. We're going to have value added, non-value added, and we're going to have needed and not needed. Okay? We're going to be able to classify everything into those boxes, okay, pretty easily. Our answers are in every box are slightly different, but there's no answer here. Well, in one of the boxes we do say, consider, getting rid of or reducing. But if we go down this path, we never say eliminate. That's, you never really know, okay? What we need to do is reduce costs, be tighter, increase quality. That sort of, like big boy, macho, President Trump, I'm going to do this, I'm going to eliminate that, that in general doesn't work. I never really see that kind of stuff work. So we are going to have things that we need to, or actions that we will propose based on the place in this matrix. But the actions will be more subtle and will not cause this giant political furor that is usually caused by the other approach. So if we have something that is needed, that means we're going to have to keep it, right? If it's non-value added, meaning if the customer can't tell, we can say consider, reducing. Okay? Or start using cost control measures. Try and cut the cost in this because the customer can't tell, or can so reducing or eliminating. In the extreme you could eliminate, but probably that's not really going to happen. Okay, the eliminating is the last thing on your list to do. What you want to do is if it's necessary, like to have accounting or to have auditing or to have plumbing, you don't want to eliminate it, although you might consider it, but mainly you want to reduce the cost. So this is where we can get our cost reduction sort of hat on, or lean hat on. What's the easiest way, fastest, and most reliable way to reduce the cost? Increase the quality, right? Reduce defects. So that's always step one. And this is a good way to start here, is starting here by reducing the defects, you're going to reduce the cost. If you have something that's not necessary and non-value added, this is the only category to delete or eliminate. If possible. But you do have to hesitate because also, the first couple of times you do this and you just say, oh, this activity is really not needed and non-value added, chances are you're going to be wrong part of the time. So you have to, even when you think something's in this quadrant, you have to be a bit cautious. It takes time to develop the expertise. You notice in the assignments you've been doing, you don't hit the target right the first time, especially a complex target like this. Now, if something is value added but not needed, this is a question mark. We do not have totally clear guidance on what to do there. It's a bit of a puzzle. So that, that we don't know. Here, though, we know very clearly what to do here. And that is do absolutely nothing. Because if you touch this, you're actually redesigning the product. And an internal cost control team or management team should stay as far away from this as possible. At the point you want to tackle it, like, you can actually tackle it anytime you want to. What you have to do though, is you have to call in the product designers, call in the purchasing agents, call in the production manager. You have to actually, if you touch anything in the upper quadrant here, man, you got to energize the entire team that created this and maintain it you know, and this is a monster. This is really time consuming and really difficult. So on day-to-day management, you know, and this tool here is mainly, I should write that down, I didn't write that. This is sort of daily management. In daily management, if something is necessary and value added, it's off your plate, right? It's too big. You know, like, you know, they have that saying, above your pay grade. It's above everybody's pay grade. So that means if you're in this quadrant, you're actually, in terms of your product design, you're touching everything that the company stands for. It's brand, it's brand image, brand promise, features. You know, if the customer can tell you did it, you have no idea of knowing what the customer cares about without really long, careful thought. And certainly if you're an inside guy, like you're an inside accountant or cost manager or daily manager, your expertise about what the customer really wants is pretty darn weak. You should stay away from it. This is actually where we do most of our work. So most of your work in terms of world-class manufacturing and lean is going to happen here. Okay, and this is the bulk. There's really not much stuff down here, and there's not much stuff down here. This is where probably 70% of all your activities are. Where this quadrant is miraculous, though, if coming at it from this point of view, though, it lets you focus on things that you really should be focusing on, and where if you screw up, it's not going to do big damage. Because, right, when you do stuff, you're going to screw up a lot. You know, no matter what you do, you are not going to do it right the first time. Okay? So what do you want to pick to work on? You want to pick something to work on that's not going to explode into a disaster situation when you're trying to improve it. And that would be this quadrant here. This is the safe quadrant for experiments. Try things out, even if you're only 80% sure it's going to work. If your team agrees and your boss is willing to take the risk, this is the quadrant for learning and experimentation. Once you have carefully thought through all of these definitions and you have some confidence that you have things in the quadrants, this is your safety quadrant. This one, you may not have anything in here. It's not clear that, you know, the odd time you would find something here. And you're not really going to have that much in here. It'll be pretty obvious, you know, you'll see it. But still, I would urge you to go slow, because it's going to take a couple of years before you really are good at piloting these definitions. Okay, so this then is the approach you should be using for activity-based management, rather than the approach that your book proposes. So we leave it in the book to sort of tease you into believing it, and then we come back and we challenge that. So we're creating that learning cycle by having the traditional view of ABM in the book, and then in class coming back. So if you didn't read the book and buy into that, your learning's not going to be quite as strong. Part of the strength of this process is sort of getting a pretty good commitment to believe that other thing, and then, wow, oh, I can see now that would be a mistake. Okay? You'll also see there are a couple of exercises in your book where they're trying to have you identify value added versus non-value added based on the definition that they have, and it's essentially impossible. And on your own, in a later video, I'll go over problem 11.30, and you'll see that it's impossible really to answer that question with the definitions that are in the book. On the other hand, if you use the definitions I have on the other side of the page, can the customer tell if you did it? Then it's value added. If the customer can't tell, then it's not value added. If you use those definitions, then everyone can agree, mostly. There are one or two that may be a bit fuzzy, but most of you will be able to come to agreement on this list if you use the hardcore definitions. If you use the fuzzy, you know, semi-pseudo-economic definitions, you will not be able to come up with agreement on this. And those sort of fuzzy economic definitions became fuzzier because they were trying to deal with the concept of the needed and the not needed, but in the same definition, and it's just impossible. So activity-based management, I'm a big fan of it. It has faded a little bit because of the problems with those definitions of value-added, non-value-added. I think that's really unfortunate, because I think if you tighten up your definitions and approach it more, you know, in a more sophisticated way, notice a little paradox here. This is a more sophisticated way to do the analysis, but it's more sophisticated because we made these definitions more sort of primitive and simple. Primitive and simple. By having the comparison between these two very clear but more primitive concepts, we were able to come up with a much more sophisticated categorization that was really, really helpful. Okay? And this will save you. These are your two main quadrants, and this is the one that's your safety zone to play around with and fail in. Okay? You need to be able to fail. If your organization can't fail, you are paralyzed. You will not take action. Everyone above you will be frozen stiff. In a lot of your essays, especially that first IKM essay, a lot of you revealed that you had given ideas and your colleagues had given ideas and management didn't implement any of them. Why? Management stupid? No. But you know what? They can't take failure, right? So they just they're frozen. So identifying your safe zone for failures is really, really important. That pretty much has to come before K, right? Part of standardizing is you have to, you standardize things. Then somewhere you have to identify your safe zone, because K always has a defect rate, and sometimes it's a really big defect rate. If I am looking at an organization, even like Toyota, their success rate on their innovations, on their improvement suggestions, their success rate's probably less than 50%. But you know what? If they didn't fail 50% of the time, they wouldn't have gotten the other 50% of those benefits. And these are people that are really good at doing this stuff, and they still fail a lot. So anyway, so this is sort of a magical way to think about things and to protect your life and career at the same time. Only take action here where you have a safety zone. So that is a bit of the introduction to the ABM concept. It should be pretty obvious conceptually to you because of the way the book is oriented. And then we'll have a couple of technical things to go into in addition to that in the next lectures. One of the most important actually is the D to P ratio. I'm not going to go into it, but it's always written like this. I have no idea. Whoever did this, 40, 50 years ago. It's a delivery to production ratio. This tells you whether technically you can do just in time or not. Okay? So just in time, lot size 1 it's always an ideal form that we want to strive for, but at any given point in time, it may not be always technically possible. It may not be the wise thing to do. This will tell you whether it's the wise thing to do with the technology that you have now. That's the important piece. The D to P ratio is for current technology. Right? And it tells you, is it wise or productive for me to do lot size 1 now? And mostly the answer is no. Okay, lot size 1 and true just in time is something that's really always great to pursue, but most of us are going to be, in a D to P ratio sense, we're going to be in a position where we can't go all the way now. But this also is a very good guidance, because we know that there are huge benefits for lot size 1. If your current technology makes it unwise, then most of your consideration here, you're going to have 1,000 different tasks you could consider on how to improve and reduce errors. This will focus you on reducing errors or improving the effectiveness of your operations in things that can change your D to P ratio. So changing the D to P ratio to make it closer to 1 or less than 1, 1 or less than 1 would indicate you can do just in time effectively. So this then can provide some guidance on which of the projects to pick first up there. And notice it is activity oriented. That's hence the activity-based management. So that's the first intro. Take a look before the next lecture. Read the section on D to P ratio, and we'll also discuss a little bit more in depth in a technical sense some of the value-added and non-value-added things. And that is the end of the introduction to Chapter 11. Bye.